Okay, so we're holding 6 weeks. We're holding 6 weeks, which means 6 classes away from one of the great mysteries of Jewish history, which is Purim. Yeah. Right? Purim is an intersection of many, many cultures. Obviously, we're centered on the Jewish story of Esther and Mordecai. But the Assyrians, who took the northern tribes into exile, were defeated by the Babylonians, were defeated by the Persians and Medes together, were defeated by the Persians by themselves. Eventually, the Persians created what is really one of the largest empires in all of history. And the Jews were, to a very large degree, pieces on the chessboard of Mediterranean history. In times they prospered, and at times they suffered badly. For the sake of this discussion, I want to separate in your minds the ideas of Bnei Yisrael, right, the children of Israel, the Israelites, as they were known, and the Jews, who came from the southern kingdom. Right? The Levium were divided between both. Right? They, in a way, ministered to both the northern and southern kingdoms. Right? The southern kingdom was really composed of the tribe of Benjamin and Judah. The 10 other tribes were from the north. Right? And they divided into 2 nations that virtually had a civil war at one point, after the death of King Solomon. The weakness of the nation divided eventually led to its destruction, first in the north and then in the south. The story of the world around them is a story of some very, very famous emperors, Cyrus the Great, Darius. This is the and many things were going on in the rest of the world at this time too. In China, mathematics was in full flourish. Confucius was living at that point, and passed away just as the Purim story begins. What I would like to examine in this part of our learning, which will focus for the next 5 weeks on the Purim story, is really who the players are and what their motives are, where they come from, and where they go at the end of the story. You know, what is this story? We know it pretty well from the Jewish perspective, right? It begins with a king named Achashverosh. He's married to a woman named Vashti. He's unhappy with Vashti, and at a certain point it seems that she disappears from the scene. Most people hold that he ordered her to be killed in drunken stupor at the advice of the antagonist of the story, which is Haman the Agagite. The fate of Israel seems to be in the hands of Haman, who King Agag was a king that lived at the time of Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. He was from the tribe of Amalek. Amalek is the antagonist of both God and Jews throughout history. Saul, in the book of Samuel, fights the Agagites, fights the Amalekis. He defeats them. And then, against the instructions of the prophet Samuel, he decides, and he claims that he's doing this because of pressure from the people. He's a Democrat. That the people wanted to keep the best of the animals alive from the Amalekis in order to sacrifice them, as Saul puts it to Samuel, to your God. And he keeps King Agag alive. Mm-hmm. This is not so strange in ancient times. Kings had a certain respect for each other, even when they were enemies. And more than that, they could ransom a king to their country for a great deal of money. So it was not unusual to take a king as ransom. And this is, in fact, what Saul did. When Samuel arrives on the scene, he says that God is outraged by this behavior. He has Agag brought to him, and he severs him with a sword. However, it seems that he achieved this about 24 hours too late. The night before, Agag made a woman pregnant. And that woman is the great-great-grandmother of the evil character, and one of the most evil characters in Jewish history, Haman, who appears on the scene in our story. It seems he was a barber who became a prime minister. Interestingly, he's not a Persian. Haman. He's not a Persian. He's a Middle Easterner, so to speak. He's from the same part of the world as the Jews are. And, you know, we're actually very familiar in our own time with this situation. Who is it that are the greatest enemies of modern-day Persia? Iran. Mm-hmm. Who are the greatest enemies of them?
Today?
Today.
So of course.
What?
For the greatest enemy for no.
Arabs.
No, the greatest
Saudi
Iran.
There's a unity today within the Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia, a Sunni leader, the guardian of Islam's holy sites, and their arch enemies, not the Jews, actually, not the Jews, the Shia, that are led by the Persian nation, which is modern-day Iran.
That's right.
Israel is, again, caught in the middle of this. Neither side really likes the Jews, that we know. And it's a very careful game that the Jews have to play in this world, because whichever side they're on, showing their hand as being on that side is bad for that side. Right? And Israel is a mighty nation. Now, it turns out that Israel was a mighty nation then as well. Like it is today, it was small. But its technology at that time was very great. Very great. Let me read you something from Sargon II. Sargon II was the Assyrian emperor who really created the Assyrian Empire. Right? So let me just read this to you. This is from a book called The Bible Unearthed. But perhaps the most indicative association of the Israelites with military horsemanship comes from a period immediately after the conquest of the northern kingdom of Assyria, when a special Israelite chariot unit was incorporated into the Assyrian army. In fact, the research of Stephanie Daly on Assyrian tablets called the horse lists. The horse lists were documents that were written in clay tablets that were kept by... The Assyrians kept very, very good records. By the way, much better than the Babylonians did. They kept excellent records of who they conquered, what the nature of the armies were. They had many pictographs, but they also had detailed cuneiform documents that they had. One of the most famous is a thing called the horse list, which is really a description of their cavalry. You can imagine. And the leaders of their cavalry, the numbers of horses, the nature of the horses. So, and the horse lists obviously were unearthed. They provide information on officials, officers, and units of the Assyrian army in the days of Sargon II. These records indicate that while other specialized troops from conquered regions were incorporated into the Assyrian army as individuals, the Israelite chariot brigade was the only foreign unit permitted to retain its national identity. So one of the qualities of the Assyrians was in the nations that resisted them and they conquered, they did the same thing that Joseph did in Egypt and that Stalin did in the Soviet Union. Nations that showed a resistance based on nationality, one of the most famous is the Chechens, actually. He not only killed many and damaged what he could, but he also forced them into exile into different parts of the country. And this is what the Assyrians did originally. If they saw resistance, they just broke up the nation and mingled it with other nations, which really shattered a great deal of their nationalism because they were separated from one another, right? There is an exception to this now, right? So if he conquered an army, if Sargon II conquered an army, he would divide the conquered army and draft it into the Assyrian army, into different sections of the Assyrian army, but not keep them all together. One exception, the Israelite charioteers. So when we say Israelite, we're talking about the northern kingdom, right? Not the Jews, right? You know, today in Central Asia, when you run into sometimes with Bukharan Jews, sometimes with others that are exiles, not from the second temple, but from the first temple, and you ask them if they're Jewish, they don't like this question. And they say, no, we're not.
Why?
Because they're Israelite. They are people who were exiled by the Assyrians. The Jews are from the southern kingdom. They're from Judah, the tribe of Judah. These are from the 10 tribes, right? And they have a tradition of being from the 10 tribes, and they don't like to be called Jews. They're Bnei Israel. They're Israelites, right? So it's very different.
The Israelites were up north, right? And
Yes, they were the 10 northern tribes.
So the Israelites
And the southern
Jews,
kingdom was
this
Judah
region.
and Benjamin,
Right.
right? Right. So today we're all called Jews, which comes from the tribe of Judah. And the sense was that the majority of people of a tribe that returned with Ezra were predominantly from the tribe of Judah, and that's where the name came from. Right? But those who were exiled at the time of the destruction of the first exile, right? They, at the destruction of the first temple, they maintained they're Israelite. Right? Yeah.
So Israelites and Jews were very much culturally different, like Sephardim, Ashkenazim today. It's
well,
a bad analogy.
I'm not sure that that's the right analogy, but the answer is that they were enemies, actually, at different times. Right? And we have it in our own writings because they wanted, in a sense, they both had a belief in the God of Israel. Right? It seems to be true. But they wanted to express it differently. And we, of course, believe that there's one place for the temple. Guess where that is? Let me just finish the thought, okay? The Temple Mount, right?
Right.
The Northern Kingdom said, okay, look, if we're not going to be in charge, we're going to build our own temple and our own facilities. And at one point they prohibited the people from the north, literally prohibited them by the sword from going to the temple in Jerusalem. Yes.
You're saying they, but it was a decision of the king.
Yes, the king and his forces.
Yeah, the king.
Which is not an edict. He was enforcing
political
it.
because of his personal ego, because of another rule that only king sitting at the temple.
That's right. That's right. The only person who sits is the king, right? And the question was, which king? When you have two kings of Israel, right? And the prophet said it's the king, the proper king, which is a descendant of David and Melech, which sits in Jerusalem, from the tribe of Yehuda, which is where kings are supposed to come from, not from Ephraim, which was where the kings of the north came from. Right? So he said, if I'm not going to be treated as a king, if I have to walk behind the king from Yehuda, I'm not going. and neither is anybody from the north. Right? So there was a great deal of hostility, and it led to idol worship.
So
The kings of the north were real. The kings of the south, by the way, at times, we are checkered. We have good kings and bad kings from the south. From the north, they're almost all awful. It led to idol worship. It led to building, bulls and rams out of gold and all kinds of stuff.
But the hostilities between them, the Israelites and the those from the tribe of Judah, it was before the exile to Babylonia.
Yes. Yeah, they were, as I said,
Yeah.
Assyria attacked the north first and took them into exile, right? Then later came back, and they surrounded Jerusalem and wanted to take Jerusalem, and there was a miracle in the camp, right? And we know there's a Haftorah about the lepers. I don't know if anybody remembers it. They can't go to, I think they couldn't get into Jerusalem. They're very hungry. They said, let's see what's at the Assyrian camp, right? Assyrian camp was, I think, 150,000 soldiers. Right? And they got to the camp, right? And lo and behold, it was, you could describe it very much the way you would describe the Iraqi camp during the Gulf War. I don't know if anybody remembers the story of all of their uniforms and weapons, everything were scattered along the highway. They made such a fast retreat, and they didn't want to be seen as soldiers of Iraq as the forces were coming to liberate Kuwait. It was, shock and awe, etc. And all along the highway back to Iraq, there were vehicles and clothes and everything. And that's what had happened to the Assyrian army. And I forget, there were maybe there was a miracle of noises, and they thought it was the hooves of cavalry, and they panicked, right? And the lepers come back to Jerusalem and say, we got some good news, right? They're gone. Didn't have to do anything. They're gone. And so for some time after that, the south survived. The north was in exile. And then later the south was conquered, eventually by Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, his general, Babylon defeated Assyria, right? And then went back and took Jerusalem, took the south. Right? So let me just finish reading this note here, right? Yeah. So it says here, these records indicate that while other specialized troops from the conquered regions were incorporated into the Assyrian army as individuals, the Israelite Chariot Brigade was the only foreign unit permitted to retain its national identity. The Assyrian king Sargon says it best. I formed a unit with 200 of their chariots for my royal force. It would seem, therefore, that because the Israelite charioteers were so famous for their skill, they were allowed a special status. Right? And it appears that they continued to grow in power as they were shifted from one empire to another. That is to say, as the Medes and the Persians, or as Babylon conquered the Assyrians, and then as the Medes and Persians conquered Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were defeated, that Cyrus and then later Darius, it's a little question exactly who Achashverosh is, we're going to work on that in a second, that these charioteers remained as a unit, which would mean not these charioteers, but their children and grandchildren continue with these skills and these jobs. Right? And there are some who believe, I am one of them, that they play a major role at the end of the Purim story. So let's look a little bit more at who it is that Achashverosh is, right? Because he's a bit of a mystery. There is nobody, and one of the problems with the mysteries about Achashverosh, right, is that when kings are named, the question is, whose name do they have, right? Is it a Babylonian name? Is it a Median name? Is it a Persian name? an Assyrian name or a Jewish name. That's to say, most of these characters were named in many chronicles of different nations. Yes?
Is it names like happened with the king, like with the Papa Rimsky? Pope? Pope gets the name, not his own name. He forgets his own name.
Like Pharaoh. Also, right?
Yeah.
No, but
It's a title.
It's not a title. For example,
You're saying does he assume a name, a royal name?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And the other was a Pope John, and
Right.
this, and that was all the
John wasn't John. He was
Yeah.
different.
Wojtyla.
But yeah.
That may be true. That may be true. But even if that was true, that would still be one name, right?
But it means when it was given, it was a reason why it was given, and it probably makes sense which language would be.
Yeah, I mean, there's Xerxes and Artaxerxes. Guess who's the son? Artaxerxes, right?
No, maybe they were giving the names of their those who were there, like Sveti, whatever. So
It may some significance in the name.
You know, there is I mean, sometimes the Hebrew is quite similar. There's Darius, we call him. Daryovish is what we call him in Hebrew, right? There was Darius the First, Darius the Second, right?
Which one was the son of Esther?
Many people believe that Darius the Second,
Yes,
right, was the son, and there's reason to believe it because the Gemara dates his birthday from Nisan, Aleph Nisan, right? And Aleph Nisan, the birthday and the beginning of a reign is Aleph Nisan, right? You know, Queen Victoria's birthday is not on Victoria Day. And by the way, it's a day that is not celebrated anywhere but in Canada. The Brits don't have Victoria Day.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
Why?
It's something left over from colonial days. That's what it's
Because she
left
played a major role in establishing. She came to Canada, right? And she chose where the capital city was, Ottawa.
Well, maybe that's it.
That's
I'm
probably why.
not sure.
So she had a.
But it also isn't her birthday, right? It was a day picked that was...
To commemorate.
It's not her birthday.
It may commemorate her visit to Canada for all I know. It's not her birthday.
Commemorating
Not her
visit.
birthday.
Yeah.
Not her birthday. The tradition was in dating a reign. You know, when you said, this is the 14th year of the reign of David HaMelech, right? It wasn't when he assumed the throne. It was from Nisan, Aleph Nisan of that year, right? Because our calendar begins, of course, not in Tishrei. It's a very peculiar thing. I won't get into it right now.
So Nisan
But
Exodus.
Nisan is the first of months. In Parsha Bo, which we just read, this is actually given to the Jewish people, the control of the calendar, and it starts with Aleph Nisan. Although it raises something that we can all think about and discuss sometime in the future. Why is it that the calendar changes from 5775 to 5776 in the 7th month? It's a curious thing, right?
Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, in Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah, which is the 7th month of the year, we go and get a new calendar. It would be strange to get a new calendar in
It's a
August.
very good question.
It's a curious question. I'm not sure of the answer. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but it's a curious thing, right?
No, why it's in the 7th month?
The first day of the 7th month is when you get a new
New Year
calendar.
is not the first month of the.
It's a curious thing, right?
But
They
Adam
were
and,
officially-
Adam and Eve were born in Tishrei, though.
Yes, officially we know
Maybe
that the
that's
New
what-
Year
that's what
starts
the
in
creation of the
Nisan,
world.
right?
was
But
supposed
by
to Tishrei.
calendar, by
Because
everything,
it's
it's
seven
Tishrei when
No.
it starts the New Year.
It was the first month.
But that doesn't make sense.
So-
Because the first month is Nisan.
It's like having a kid.
No, but
and
the Nisan, what we're
You're born,
celebrating,
say, now you're
it's
7, we're
Exodus,
starting you at
like,
7 years
Nisan
old.
is the
Yeah.
month of Exodus
Yeah.
when the Jewish,
But number one month.
But it is the first month
Or
of the
7
year.
months old.
right?
I'm not saying this. God said it. 2 parshas ago, Parsha Bo. God said the first month of the year is Nisan, right? And he says, and you will celebrate, right?
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah, right? The beginning of the head of the year on the first day of the 7th month, right?
Yeah.
But we actually turn over the calendar leaf on that day.
Rosh Hashanah in the Torah is not really Rosh Hashanah. It's the feast of trumpets, or it's not called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah.
You're right.
It's not
Yeah.
a new
He-
year.
he
Yeah,
doesn't
Yom
say it's a new
HaZikaron, time of memory. You know,
It's the
Yom-
day of the blowing of the
Yeah.
shofar, or
Yeah.
Yom
Maybe
Teruah.
we
Trua.
just call it New
True,
Make
Year.
that
right?
up.
Yeah,
But I think
Yeah.
in
When you-
Ezekiel the
yeah.
prophet, though, it's mentioned Rosh Hashanah.
yeah, and
But,
I think
so
the
at some
Martyrs
point
said-
they
yeah.
start calling
It's
it
the day
that.
Yeah.
when we're blowing shofar. Yeah.
But so the calendar, we shouldn't buy a new calendar on Rosh Hashanah. We
By
should
the
buy
way,
a new
nobody's called
calendar
it
on
New
Pesach.
Year. People go, it's ahead of the year.
Yeah,
It's a celebration of the head
But
instead of a behind.
I'm coming back to the
Whatever.
same question, right? All of those things. Your calendar begins, your piece of paper,
Mhm.
right? The day before Rosh Hashanah is 5775.
Mm-hmm.
The day after Rosh Hashanah is 5776.
Right.
Yeah. So
So-
there is no
Anyway,
answer?
what?
There is no answer?
Not right now.
Oh,
I'm still
okay,
working
okay.
on that.
Okay.
I'm still working on that.
Okay.
One day.
I've asked that
See
question
how
to people.
interesting we can live with a bizarre thing like this and it doesn't bother us.
We don't even think about
It
it.
doesn't, but
I never thought about
We
it till
never
this
thought
year.
about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody is accepting it,
Yeah,
and that's the way
it's
we're
like,
living.
Yeah, but Nisan is the first month for the Jews.
Yeah.
As
Not according to the Torah, it's not.
Even the Torah
Oh,
counts.
the Torah, yes.
Even the
Nisan.
Torah
According
counts
to
the
the
years.
Torah,
It
yeah.
says,
Yeah.
and what in
So
the second
shouldn't-
month of the first.
So shouldn't the
For us,
day
because
before-
it's the Independence Day
should-
for the Jews. It's
But shouldn't the last day of Adar be 5775 and the
But
first day of
the-
Nisan be
but the-
5776?
but not for a
yeah,
world.
but everything was created, and the Adam was created on first of
So
Tishrei.
this is not an argument, but there is an argument about when creation began in the mind of God. Many say that it began on the first of Nisan, and He did it
In the sixth day.
on the first of Tishrei. There's a big
Mhm.
discussion about this
But
Uh-huh.
among Chazal.
So there is no
Right.
like consensus on the subject. Like
So
to,
the world-
There's a lot of arguments about
There
it.
was
So
a
as I said
arguments,
to
that's
them,
what I
the
said.
What?
world
No,
was
because Adam and Eve were
premature.
created
It was
in
7
Tishrei.
months.
If the world started in Tishrei,
He was born
Absolutely,
7
yeah.
months
then
premature.
that would be every Tishrei. Because we're
No,
our calendar
God
is supposed
was
to be
molded
counting
over
from
for
Adam
5
and Eve.
months.
That means
It
we're not
means,
counting
right.
really from
For some reason,
Nisan. We're counting from Adam and Eve.
don't I?
Absolutely.
But God told us this
But
is the
we-
first
but
of
we live
months,
by the
right?
calendar, not
And
by
creation
Nisan.
began on the
We
7th
live by
month?
the Tishrei calendar.
Yeah.
Think of it, there's a
And
problem,
it's
right?
cycle every
Creation
year.
began on the
It's just
7th
Where
month.
every Tishrei,
What was happening for the first
first
6
Tishrei,
months?
would have been 1 year since the creation.
But it doesn't bother us too much, right?
Yeah.
We can live with that. Okay, so let's try and find out who is Akash
I
Baruch,
think
right?
it's the difference
by
of
the way, from the point of view of the
astronomical
world,
and from
it's a
point of
first
view-
day.
it's from
When
point
is
of
your
view-
birthday?
Yes.
Whenever is your birthday, it's your first day.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what your parents were doing.
It's
from
the
then.
first.
Well, actually, the first day, right? You know that the first day is the 25th
Yeah,
of Elul.
Yes.
Right.
creation of
Man, it's the birthday of the creation of Adam,
Mhm.
Yes.
right?
Right.
It is Tishrei, the first of Tishrei. Right? So the world existed 5 days before.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, your family existed before you were born. But for you, from your point of view, the most important day for you, it's your
The humanity was created on the
Appearance.
first of Tishrei. So there is no, for us, the first day of in our calendar is the Nisan.
Really,
But-
we should be counting years for the Jewish people from the day of, for Jewish people from Nisan, but for the world, it's Tishrei.
It's Tishrei.
Right.
But for Jewish people, they should be, even in the Torah, God says, well, in the second month, in the second day from coming out of Egypt, it's like Hashem, in the second year. So it's like Hashem was counting the years from Nisan too. If you read, when they're putting up the Mishkan, it says, in the second year, in the
Yeah.
second month from the
That's
day,
right.
they did so and
That's
so,
right.
right? So
Yep.
Hashem started counting years, like 1 year was complete after on the next Nisan.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But we never continued counting.
What did they do on Tishrei that year?
I don't know, but why didn't they just keep counting
They got the
Continue
second
right
Luchos, is
to
what
this day?
happened.
Right?
They got the second Luchos
Yeah.
on the 10th of Tishrei that year.
But they should have just
They
kept
got the
counting
Yom
every
Kippur.
year. It's 2 years
Yeah.
since we come out of Egypt,
They got
3
the
years.
second
So they
4
did.
years.
Yeah, Yom
By
Kippur
the way,
is
so this is
Tishrei.
actually the point I was trying to make. I'm sorry, we kind of got off topic, but this is the point I was trying to make, right? Is that Darius II, his birthday and his reign is counted from Aleph Nisan, from the first day of Nisan. This is unique outside of Israel. Right? And I say unique
Because he was a Jew.
because and I say unique because it's a word that's used poorly most of the time, meaning special. But unique means the only case of it, right? This is the only case of the Talmud counting a reign from the first of Nisan. Now, lest you think that that's the end of the story, it isn't. It seems midway through his reign, the Talmud changed how they were counting it, which is a statement about how the elders of Israel viewed the son of Esther and Achashverosh, right? It may be that it seems that Achashverosh died quite soon after the Purim story. That Darius II may well have been a good Jewish son to his mom Esther until she passed away. And then, for a better phrase, he went off the derech. Because he turned into, it seems like, a Russia. At first, he told the Jews, go home, everything is good. I will help finance. There were two emperors who helped finance the building of the base of Mikdash. One was Cyrus, right?
The Cyrus allowed
Koresh.
the Jew- no,
He's the son, Esther and Darius,
But
right?
Cyrus allowed
No.
the Jews to return
Koresh,
from Babylon and exile.
Koresh was a Mede.
To return to Israel.
Koresh is before the whole story. If you remember, let me give you a little reminder here. If you remember, the Jews had begun to rebuild the base of Mikdash. And Haman's son, who was a governor in Palestine, sent a note that they're building walls, preparing not for a spiritual experience, but to rebel. And so Achashverosh stopped everything in Palestine, in Israel, right? And it was finished. They didn't finish the job at that point. So Ezra and Nehemiah went back under Cyrus, which was a period significantly before Achashverosh, right? Then Haman stopped the building of it, right? And then Darius allowed for it to be completed, basically, and like Cyrus, funded it. A little side note, which some of you know, I'll repeat, is that President Harry Truman was the president of the United States at the time that the UN voted for the creation of the State of Israel for the Jews. And after he had completed his term in office, he was asked, he was asked, why did you support the creation of the State of Israel? The Arabs were much more numerous, they had greater forces, oil, etc. And I should note that Truman did this in a very, very conscious way. He waited till moments before the vote and then called the UN ambassador over the head of the State Department, which controls the UN ambassador, and said, Mr. Ambassador, this is the Commander-in-Chief and the President of the United States, Harry Truman. I'm giving you a direct order to vote in favor of the creation of the State of Israel. Right? And at that point, he didn't have time to consult with the State Department, who would have stopped it if they could have. So Truman was asked, why did you do this? And he had a very, very simple response. He said, I'm Cyrus.
Was it
Truman.
Truman said,
He said, I'm Cyrus. I'm Koresh. Right? Who is Cyrus? Right? It says of Cyrus, who is the successor, we call him Koresh, who is the successor to Darius the First. He's known in world history as Cyrus the Great, and Jewish history likewise considers him to be an extraordinary person, albeit for different reasons. Cyrus permitted the Jews to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the base of Mikdash. Indeed, his famous proclamation to that effect is the very last verse of Tanakh. It's the last verse of Tanakh. It's from Chronicles. Thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, Hashem, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has commanded me to build him a temple in Jerusalem, which is in Yehuda. Whoever there is among you of the entire people, may God be with him, and let him go up.
David, I have a question. Koresh, Cyrus Koresh, he was not related in any way to Darius or anyone. He was later.
He's described as his successor.
Darius,
The
second.
successor of Darius the First.
The first.
The
So
first,
but by the fact that he said that, it means he was acquainted with the scriptures. He believed in God. He thought that it was, and he thought that he had an important historic role to play, and that's why he was making his decision making.
Truman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
was in the same
Absolutely.
position. He was the
He
leader
knew
of
the
the
You
scriptures.
should know
He knew
that
the
Darius.
scriptures, so that means he could see that this was not just something that was just happening. That this was something God was doing, and
I think people, we always hear at the end of a term of somebody in office, whether it's a prime minister or president, or even a king, they're concerned about what?
Legacy. Yeah.
Their legacy.
Right.
Did Truman want to be remembered as the guy who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima,
Right.
which he did, and he argued his reasons for doing it, that he felt overall it would save lives, both Japanese and American. I don't want to get into the discussion, but that was his view of it at the time, because the mainland of Japan would have to be invaded without doing it. But how much better to be remembered as casting a deciding vote, for the creation of the state of Israel, and using whatever influence he could to make it happen, than for
Remembered
this.
by Jews, but everybody else would probably feel different.
Yeah. But I'm saying, what did he want to be remembered as, right? I agree with you, by the way. How successful he was is debatable. But he wants to remember that. One other thing you should know about Koresh. Koresh is the only non-Jew in Tanakh who's referred to as Mashiach. He is the Redeemer of the Jews.
There's a Koresh's translation into
he's mentioned in
into
Isaiah the prophet.
Cyrus is translated to Koresh. It's like a Hebrew
Same
name.
name.
One's
No,
English
no,
and
it's
one's
Koresh is Cyrus.
He's mentioned in Isaiah the prophet.
Yeah.
Cyrus.
Yeah.
Cyrus.
Yeah.
Before he was born, he's mentioned.
Yeah. And he's called Mashiach.
Uh-huh.
He's called Mashiach.
Named before he was born. He was
Yeah,
meant
in
to be
Isaiah the prophet,
respected.
yeah. Said he would be born.
The idea of the Redeemer, of the Jews coming back to Israel, right? It's a very important concept in our history, right? But we often idealize it, as to who that person will be and what the people will be like. The merit of the Jews to return when they left Egypt was was marginal. It was, if they don't return, then there won't be any Jews. They'll all be absorbed into Egypt, right? And it wasn't so different for the Jews returning from Persia and Babylon. You would have thought they were flocking home. They're flocking home at a slower pace than we are to Israel. In fact.
60,000 came.
So, yeah.
Redeemer and Savior, are those synonyms?
So Mashiach actually simply means anointed. It doesn't mean Redeemer or
Savior.
Savior. No. It means
No,
the
no,
one
no,
who is
no.
anointed.
No, anointed, that's exactly
Oh,
right.
anointed. But Redeemer and
No, Redeemer.
It doesn't mean that. We use those phrases interchangeably, right? But in fact, Mashiach simply means that the prophet was given a prophecy to anoint the king, this particular king, with oil.
Like I told you about
So
Yeah.
David Melech was a Mashiach, right? He was anointed by Samuel based on a prophecy, right? Now, we hold that the children of the royal line don't each one have to be anointed, that they carry the quality of the original anointing with them. But if somebody, for instance, Shaul HaMelech, was anointed, the first king, right? But he was dethroned, so to speak, by God and Samuel over this issue that we just talked about, of Agag and the Amalekites, that he did not, Samuel said, as you have torn my cloak, so the empire, the kingship, will be torn from you by one who is greater than yourself. And then Samuel was sent to the family of David to find the next king and to anoint him.
Remember I told you?
And so he was anointed, but Shlomo Melech didn't have to be anointed. Right?
He was direct.
Because he was the son of the king.
Yeah.
Right. So our belief is that a king is anointed by a prophet unless he is the son of the king. Then he doesn't need to. But he's not
So
necessarily
when
a
they
savior.
inaugurate the son, they don't put the oil on?
No, not required. Not required. It's only when the family changes. Let's read what it says about Achashverosh.
The family are not supposed to change.
The king of the Purim story was a rabid anti-Semite. Upon the instigation of the Samaritans, bitter enemies of the Jews residing in the land of Israel, he halted the construction of the temple. Achashverosh too miscalculated the end of 70 years, figuring them to be in the year 3327, the date that Nebuchadnezzar had exiled 1,000 Jewish sages. The first thing that Nebuchadnezzar did when he conquered not the north but the south was he took the elite into exile. Right. Later he took virtually the whole nation. But he started with the elite, and in a way that worked out to our benefit because the elite arrived and they began to set up yeshivas and systems in Babylon. And then when the people came, there was already an organization for them to come to.
Why they didn't come back to Israel first?
What?
Why they didn't come back to Israel first?
Who?
The elite.
They were captive.
They were captive.
Like Daniel the prophet.
No, they did not have permission to return.
No, they were captive. They couldn't
They
leave.
came back with Ezra Sofer, who came.
70 years later.
Later, that's a whole other discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree with you. No, that was my point, is that if you compare, people often say we don't have the merit, meaning the Jews of today, to have Israel as a nation. Right? But in fact, if you're judging by merit, the Jews who left Egypt had a much lower merit. They were at the 49th level of Tuma. They hadn't earned the right, to exit at all. It was entirely a matana, a gift from God.
Even
To
the ones
people who
that
not
were-
deserve
A lot
it.
of them
they-
stayed in
Ezra,
Babylon.
They were idol
Not all of
worshippers.
them
They-
returned.
Right.
They
Not all of
had
them
foreign
returned to
wives,
Israel
the
also
kids
when they
could
were
speak
allowed.
Hebrew.
That's right. Most didn't.
Most didn't. They stayed
We
in
hold there is a
Babylonian,
medrash that says 80% wanted to stay in Egypt,
In-
and they did.
Yeah.
They were buried there, right?
Yeah, same
We
Babylon.
also know that the levels of intermarriage, the
Yeah.
destruction of the language of Israel, that the high priest, all his children had married non-Jews in the land of Israel. It was a disastrous
Right.
environment that Ezra and Nehemiah came back to, and they worked very hard to make changes. But it was not, a group of tzaddikim who were there by any means. He had to convince them that they should close their stores on Saturday. Right? They weren't keeping Shabbos at all, at the time. So, we should see things in perspective, and we should see progress in perspective, and be thankful to God for all the good that He does for us.
That's right.
In the year, sorry. Okay, let me just get through this, and then we'll
Achashverosh.
end this. Achashverosh too miscalculated the end of the 70 years, figuring it from 3327, the date that Nebuchadnezzar had exiled 1,000 Jewish sages. Right. There was a prophecy by Yirmiyahu, by Jeremiah, that there would be a 70-year exile. So everybody's counting the years. The question is, where do they start? Do they start when the Assyrians took them? Does it start when the Babylonians took them, the elite, right? Or does it start at the second one, right? In the year 3395, the third year of his reign, believing that the 70 years had passed without Jewish redemption, Achashverosh made his famous feast. Right? He had a reason to celebrate. Obviously, God had abandoned the Jews. Jeremiah had said that they're going to go back. They didn't go back. Right? They're mine now. Right?
Right.
They were like, that's my prize at this point. Right? Although only 68 years had elapsed from 3327, Achashverosh reckoned that partial years of the previous kings as full years. That was not an error, as the Talmud reckons the reign of monarchs in a similar way. This mistake was the starting point for the 70 years. Disaster then struck when, drinking from the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, he ordered the execution of Queen Vashti. The ensuing story of Purim is well known, and the following chart gives the dates for the major events of the book of Esther. Note that Purim's story unfolds over a 14-year span from 3393 to 3406. Okay? So we'll continue next week, learning more about the history of Achashverosh, Haman.
You didn't say the name. What was the name? Was it the Jewish name? Was the
Whose name?
the name of the king of Ahasuerus? Whose name it was?
I didn't say the name, that's right.
You didn't.
I didn't say the name.
Okay.
I didn't say any of his names except Achashverosh. We'll get to that next week,
Okay.
Why
along
started
with
from
Esther.
From the Purims.
What?
Why you started from the time of Purim?
Why did I choose the Purim story? I chose the Purim story because we're...
No. Why you started from this point of history, not before?
So we're going to do everything. We're going to do everything.
Back and forth.
But my thought was that in 4 or 5 weeks we'll be getting ready for Purim, and it would be nice to have new insights into Purim before Purim comes. So that was my reason for it.
That's good.